Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Founder and Friends. Today, I am joined by my good friend Scott Hanselman. Howdy, Scott. How are you?
How's it? How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good this morning. I'm really excited to have you on. I was telling Maddie, who's our behind the scenes person, I've been following your content online for probably almost 20 years. You've probably had a bigger impact on my own career than you even realize from reading all of those articles, and obviously we've worked with you a little bit through Raygun as well over the years around things. And so I just wanted to extend a really big thank you for joining us on this episode. I'm keen to sort of learn a little bit more about the man and share a bit more with the community around us. Sound
No,
good?
it's absolutely my pleasure. I realized that one thing I've never done is build a company from scratch. And I remember visiting you. Were we in Wellington?
Yeah.
And I went to like what we would call a 7-Eleven, like a corner grocery store. And there was like a door to the side, and you would go above the grocery store, and then you had an office in there. And it was a very strangely shaped office. It was like
Yeah.
like a wedge of like diagonal or whatever. And they had like some guy Ivan
Yeah. Ivan Tolson.
stuck in the corner somewhere, and it's just like, how do you all like you're like 12, like 4 or 5 engineers like above this little corner store on the second floor on this cool little street with all the other little shops. And I think I went across the street, had a chicken sandwich, and I went up to the top, and now Raygun is like a multinational.
Yeah.
That's
We.
crazy
Yeah.
to me. I've never done that before. You should be very proud.
Oh, thank you. It was an interesting office. Yeah, that was it was called the penthouse suite, but it was actually an old caretaker's flat. Apparently, years ago, they used to put the caretaker would get a little sort of townhouse on top of buildings. They don't do that anymore, and so it was retrofitted. So we were like, come to the penthouse, but actually, it looks a little bit like a studio apartment. So quite the story and the journey. I think there was about 3 offices back in Wellington now.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Congratulations.
No, it's awesome. I like to say a big thanks over my coding career has been through the work that you've been doing. And it started out, I think I must, this was pre-Twitter. This was call it web 1.2 maybe, and blogging had just started. People were doing that sort of stuff, and you had Hanselman.com. And I think that was when I discovered your content and was sort of, subscribing to your RSS feed and things like that and learning tips and tricks. Um, Tell me a little bit about how did you get into that? Like, because at the time you were working in banking, is that right? Or is that even
Well,
later?
you'd have to actually, if you want to get into it, you have to back up farther.
Okay.
So my first domain, let me make sure before I tell you what it is, that it's not like been taken over and by some naughty people, was Tweak, TWEAK, as in like tweaking something. And the little company I had a 5-digit domain, and it was registered in the 90s. So my company was called Tweak Computer Support.
Oh,
And I
yes.
would, so this was like when I was 15, it was like 985. Whenever a domains could be happens, like 89 to 91. I remember the first time you could register a domain, it was like a big thing. There
Yep.
was only one place to register domains. And so somewhere in the 90s, early 2000s. And then Hanselman.com, I got in the mid 90s somewhere. And now all the Hansel people have Hanselman emails, right? So like
Yep.
I'll meet random Hanselman out in the world, and they'll be like, "Hey, can I be first name at Hanselman?" I'm like, "Absolutely, I'll make that happen for you." Like Hanselman.com was brochureware for Tweak computer support, and there's
Oh, right.
pictures of my first business card you can find on Twitter. I'll go and dig that up.
Yep.
So I was charging people to run Norton Disk Doctor
Oh,
on
yep.
uh, on their machines early on. So
That takes me back a bit, and I feel like today's session we could have a few little rabbit hole stories. But do you remember Norton Crash Guard, which I used to think was effectively the on-error resume next of every program on your computer? Like no matter what happened, it would just try to keep it running. Oh, there's the business card, looking slick.
look at that 3D printed save icon right there.
Oh man, that's a high res graphics for the
There
90s.
was another one. Yeah, that was this one here. And notice this little thing here. Do you know what this means? BBS,
Yeah, I do.
9 to noon. Yeah.
Yep.
So I had the late night bulletin board system there. I had another one around here where it was like computer support and lawn mowing. So I'd been, I guess that makes me a founder too. Uh, so yeah, I've been doing that since I was 15.
Yep. I had a similar thing where I was doing PC repair, sort of driving around and doing that while I was at university to sort of pay the bills, and that was my sort of debate. I was either going to go and get a real job, or I could just kind of keep doing this thing I was doing. And I look back and I think it was probably fortuitous that I discovered what a real job actually looked like, rather than what a sort of 19-year-old thought a job looked like. But lots of lessons learned. So yeah. But so you launched the blog though. You started writing that, and it obviously got some attention. You started to build an audience there, and I remember learning a bunch of lessons from you. Some of them I think are evergreen, especially in the age of social media. I remember learning from you things like don't blog bile, or don't give hate a permalink. So like don't go online and write a blog post that's just angry at the world, or
Yeah.
I got to be honest, Twitter makes me forget that rule sometimes, and it's getting increasingly difficult. But I always remember that it's like the Hanselman rules for like not being a bad person on the internet.
I've even taken it farther. I think with the rise of the Ted Lasso and Bob Ross, and calling back to an American hero, Mr. Rogers, there is a flavor of dad core, non-toxic masculinity that one can present. And I don't think that the kind of angry reply guy, I'm just asking questions, kind of way that people seem to behave on Twitter right now is my vibe. And I instead try to bring in the infinite patience that my own father brought when putting up with us and people to the best of my ability. I was actually at my local. I have a bad soda pop habit, so I was at my local McDonald's recently, and the guy in front of me, we're going through the drive-through, and I get my dollar soda. The guy in front of me was just being a total butt, and he was screaming at the lady, and then he went off and did his thing, and then I stopped and I said hello to the lady at the thing, and I see her every day, and I said, "How's it going? Are you okay?" She's like, "Oh yeah, sometimes I go home crying." And I was just like, "Man, I'm sorry. We're literally just having an interaction here at the drive-through." And I said, "What percentage of people are butts to you in the drive-through? Is it like 1 in 10?" She says, "Lately it's like 3 in 10." And I'm
Oof.
like, "Oh my God, like 30% of the people are just not kind." So anything that we can do to be a salve to that, to kind of undo it a little bit, is just be patient, whether it be at the drive-through, or when you're trying to get another seat on the airplane. Like, everybody's just doing their best. There's this really great restaurant locally here that has a sign outside that says, "We're doing our best. Be kind to the people who showed up."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that sign came out when the pandemic, when people weren't showing up for stuff.
Mm.
So yeah, just whatever you're doing in life, that's a good. Be kind to the people who showed up. Good for them. Sorry to go on a
Yeah.
bit of a kindness rant there, but it's in my mind because I'm just thinking about, I'm here chatting with you, and I have this cushy typey job, but that young lady is putting up with jerks in the drive-through. So, there, but for the grace of God, go we. We should respect that.
I think it's an important thing to remember. I'm not criticizing the software developer market, but I think we would be wrong to not acknowledge that there is certain benefits to this type of work that, like a lot of things, we very quickly can start taking for granted. And I think the pandemic, interestingly, really highlighted to a degree a little bit of like, I'm not saying, we don't matter, but it's like, what roles really, really, really matter. And it was interesting seeing how they were like quite often the lower paid jobs, a lot of these things, and that's actually what's got society turning over day to day. And yet we seem to have forgotten that very quickly again.
Yeah, whether something is lower paid or not doesn't make it more or less valuable, but the sustaining engineering, let's call it, whether it be in the software engineering context, sustaining engineering, or whether it be, as my dad says, work in the fryolator. This is
Yep.
all good, honest work that people are doing the best they can, and keeping the lights on is almost always under respected. There's always a dam or a power thing that it didn't work and the thing's not working anymore. And I'm sitting at home complaining while someone's out there doing the work, some first responder. There are first responders in the context of software engineering as well. We should thank our friends in hosting in Azure as well.
Yes. Just
Great,
as
great comment here I'm seeing come in from the chat.
yeah.
May I?
Yeah, absolutely.
Naima was pointing out that we should not judge someone from one interaction. Exactly. This
Yeah.
is so important. This idea that humans are designed to make a first impression and judge people on a first impression, and then flip the bozo bit. Oh,
Hmm.
JD was having a bad day. What a bozo! And then you have to spend the rest of your time unflipping that bit because you flip the switch. Oh, bozo! I don't like that guy. You know,
Yep.
that's
I
not cool.
I really like. You've probably seen it as well on Twitter. I think is it the Wait But Why account that has that does the analysis, and it has the chart that sort of goes over time, like what you think of people, and it
Mhm.
kind of goes, the more time you spend with them, the more it sort of converges to about the same spot. And so if you find yourself thinking somebody is purely evil or purely good, you're just way too early on in that getting to know them cycle.
And
Yeah.
another thing that I was taught by my dad, who I mention a lot and I quote a lot, is assume incompetence before malice. It's very
Yeah.
likely that someone doesn't know what they're doing, then they are pure evil and they're out to get you.
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of that view. One of the things touching on earlier of actually founding and building a business, is there's this kind of implicit assumption that you know what you're doing, and it's like, actually no, you're probably just maybe dumb enough to think you can figure it out every day just in time. So
Well, literally today, about an hour and a half ago, I was taking my son, who's 17, out to find his first summer job, and we walked up and down Main Street, and passing out resumes. He put out 12 resumes. So, tomorrow or whenever he starts his job, someone is going to be rude to him, and that's something he's going to have to figure out. What do you do with that energy? Right?
hmm
Energy gets generated and pushed into other people. Is he going to turn around and be rude to me? Is he going to turn around and be a jerk? Can he absorb it in a way that turns the negative energy into positive energy in a kind of a kung fu
hmm
maneuver? Uh, that is going to be very painful for me to watch as he does a service job.
Do you think a service job is somewhat essential, though, or let's say a publicly facing job is an essential part of sort of becoming well-rounded and capable later in life, even if you don't stay in that role as your career?
I think that you and I are now contemporaries, so I'm gonna say us. I don't think we're the same age, but we might be within 10, 15 years. So, um, people of our generation who have grown up with a different economy will and have the ability to buy a house now will certainly say that being in service has value. Uh, Ideally, a service job that pays living wage, I think would have value. But yes, if we separate the inflation and all of that kind of stuff, assuming that one can get a good summer job, even now I think about working catering at the Washington Park Zoo, and I have a letter my mom found that was a framed letter from some business guy who worked here in Oregon, who was at one of the dinners that was hosted at the catering in the Washington Park Zoo. That was a letter he wrote to the head of catering for the Washington Park Zoo that, Mr. Hanselman was a very good waiter that evening, and kudos, kudos, kudos. And I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. Some JD equivalent
Hmm.
liked me, and I framed that little letter that was written on his typewriter in the 80s. Those little moments like stick with me. That's been now 40 plus years, and I'm still like, oh man.
Yeah, it's
You know what I
funny,
mean?
isn't it?
How can we do that for young people so that they then say there is value in service?
I think it's a powerful point. We talk about that a little bit at Raygun and sort of how we think about managing the business. One of the things we did last year, and no, it's not really close, but it was something that mattered to my co-founder and I, was writing a personalized Christmas card to each team member. Now we're a little bit smaller than say a Microsoft, but it still sort of was in the hand cramp territory of like an actually personally written note that sort of observes something from the year, and hey, we've done this, and I hope it landed well. It seemed to, but that acknowledgement, I think, is something people default to not being great at, and at the risk of just taking this a little bit further. Sometimes when I hear somebody say something nice about somebody else, that's the thing where I'm like, that's the message to pass on. That's the thing. People, for some reason, they'll often say the kind things to other people, and they'll miss saying it to the person who needs to hear it.
Yeah, yeah. I think if you're going to be a good sponsor to someone, certainly you talk nicely about them when they're not in the room. But I was encouraging one of my 15-year-old a couple of days ago that, when was the last time you told your buddies you appreciate them? Oh, that's
Hmm.
weird, Dad. Just give it a try.
Yeah.
You know, I'm on TikTok, which is a mistake. But I'm on like inspirational TikTok, the one where like, people give $1,000 to a person because they were kind type stuff.
Yep.
And one of the TikToks that I kind of got stuck into and the algorithm picked me up was this British on the street guy. And he's like, hey, call your buddy and tell him that you love him. Like we think it's going to be like oh, yeah, yeah. And then the British guys like call their buddy and they say, man, I just want to let you know I love you. I'm like, are you being held hostage? What's going on? Are you okay? Someone got a gun to your head? It's like, no. But then they'd always turn sweet as like two dudes just say, hey, dude, I really appreciate you.
Yeah.
And you can tell that they like needed that. So like that's the TikTok that I'm on, like Legends of Zelda tips and like inspirational dudes being being kind to each other. So I want my kids to see that kind of stuff.
I think it's a big important part. I think it's a bit of that kindness conversation, and I'm loving the fact we're kind of wandering here, which is great. One of the topics we were going to sort of dig into a little
Sorry.
bit is, oh no, I think it's brilliant. Was about how you touched on it. We're obviously two people that have some level of influence, and it matters to both of us to be trying to improve the environments around us, help leave the earth a little bit better, when our time is done. I think you've done a brilliant job of that with Hanselminutes, with some of the profiles that you've managed to sort of get more into the mainstream, particularly into the tech industry where we might not see some of those conversations, even if they did happen. Um, I'd love if you could talk a little bit about some of your motivations there, as well as what you found to be like maybe a couple of effective rules that you kind of or principles you follow around that.
I mean, about getting people to talk or putting
Well,
their message
also
out there.
getting that message out there, but also from people who may not be heard of normally. Like let's get right to the point. You and I, we're kind of becoming old white dudes, right? We are like the archetype of like getting some level of influence. It matters to both of us that it be a diverse set of people that have influence. And so that was a little bit more looking to explore that and
No,
how
I
you help
appreciate
there.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like if you technology should look like the mall. I love the mall. I like going to the mall because it's like the town square, the modern town square. I know that where everyone's talking about the death of the mall, but if you go to like the center of any city, there's some central square, and when you look around that central square, there's a lot of cool looking people. But then you go into the boardroom and everyone looks like us. It would be like nice if as many spaces as possible look like a nice random mix of people, a representative mix. That's all anyone's looking for is representation. So, somewhere 700 or 800 episodes ago, I realized, wait a second, I've had like, 9 guys in a row on the show. You have to ask yourself, was that chance? Well, start flipping a coin and see if you can get 9 heads. At some point after the third or fourth dude, now you're just getting lazy and you're subconsciously picking people that because you're picking from your crowd. So I'm like, maybe I'm not looking in the right places. And this is where you have to, if you're going to do inclusion, you got to do it correctly. If you start counting and being like, oh, I need more women on the show, that's an initial moment where you go, I need to change something. But you have to actually back up and you go, why do I keep picking this kind of person? Usually it's because you're picking whoever's near. You're picking the people that you have lunch with. You're picking the people that you bump into at the local civic luncheon or whatever that you go to. So it's not necessarily that you are actively consciously picking a homogenous group of people and excluding people. It's that you're just not casting a wide enough net. So then you say, well, where are some luncheons that I could go to find folks? Maybe they're working, maybe their heads down, maybe they're not as much self-promoters. If I go and ask to speak at conferences, and in doing that, I am being seen and being visible, while an underrepresented person might not necessarily have the right person to email or the confidence or the whatever to go and do that. So they might want to be pulled in and brought in and given the opportunity. So several hundred episodes ago, I just started making sure that the show looks like the mall. And now I'm on episode 900 comes out in 2 weeks
Yep.
of the Hanselminutes podcast. And you can scroll back 700 episodes and it pretty much looks like the mall. which is how it's supposed to. So I'm being a little aspirational, but I'm not running out of people.
Yeah.
This is the other excuse. Oh, I couldn't find anyone to speak at my conference. Start earlier, cast a wide net. That's how you make sure that everyone gets heard.
That's right. There are 7 billion people to pick from.
I tell you, how do you have such a diverse podcast if there's 900? I could do this all day.
Yeah. Now that's awesome. One of the guests that I've enjoyed listening to you talk to on there has been your wife, Mo. And again, this is something I think is really unique about your podcast is you don't kind of listen to it just to be like, oh, what's the latest language model that's come out this week? Scott's going to take us on that journey. It was, hey, let's talk about, how do we make the marriage work? And these are things that are horizontally applicable, shall we say. And I've always found that a really interesting element to your show as well that I've found value in.
Yeah, it's a little challenging. I mean, we can't guarantee that a marriage will always work, right? God forbid we shouldn't part ways, but I've been renewed for another season, which is good. But those kind of conversations about when a technology-minded person or a person of a certain, I don't think I am neurodiverse or neurospicy, but I am a weird dude. And when a weird dude marries someone who has actual social skills, stuff can happen. So we have had Mo on the podcast multiple times to talk about what it's like to put up with me.
I have had my wife once on Founder and Friends, and she was very polite. She actually works with me at Raygun, and we get a few people that sort of go, how does that even work? And to be honest, I don't actually know quite the answer. It just does work. We have had the situation, I'll share this a bit of a laugh for folks, but when we were up in Seattle and we were setting up the office there, and we'd been there a couple of weeks and we'd hired a few people, and one guy says to me, he goes, oh, JD, how was your weekend? I said, oh, it was good. It was good. Yeah, no, Seeing and I just stayed in, watched some Netflix in bed, and chilled out. And this look of what? And it was because you wouldn't pick it. Like straight in the workplace, you wouldn't think we were married. We just seemed like two colleagues sort of going about our work. So, I was like, yeah, no, I don't take all the staff to watch Netflix at home in bed. But it works for us.
I'm glad.
Yeah. We get from others saying that they don't know how we do it, but anyway. And so you've got this platform, you've done these things. You mentioned you're on TikTok now. You've mentioned it's a mistake. I often call Twitter my mistake. Like I kind of love the fact I can connect with people, and I kind of hate some of the side effects. Should I join TikTok? Should I not join TikTok? What's your take on social media today?
So so far, given the history, I think social media is generally a bad thing because it has been algorithmically commoditized, and with every social media platform, you are the product, right? Even the dumpster fire that is the next version of Twitter is still proving whether you pay $8 or not, you're still the product. That's why I am personally a fan of the open web, and I've always said, and you quoted at the beginning, own your words, right? Like get your own domain. The problem is a domain, an SSL certificate, hosting it, keeping it up. That's challenging. And then we've seen with decentralized systems like Blue Sky or Mastodon, there are challenges with moderation. So that said, putting people in control of hosting their own stuff and control of their own identity, I think is going to be the way. So if we could have the MySpaces and the Twitters and the Facebooks and stuff where I could take my data with me, my data was owned by me, I could check all the boxes to say, I don't want you to have my location, I don't want you to train AI models on me. That would have a lot of value, like a Facebook as a nonprofit type of a thing. But the answer is let people host their own things, and there's some interesting work happening in distributed identity and the idea of like these little containers of your personal information. So all of that said, to get back to your question about should you go on TikTok, it depends on if you want to get on TikTok as a consumer, as a producer, or if you think it's going to expand the brand. None of the stuff that I do is to consciously expand any brand. I'm just bumbling around. So I'm everywhere. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Mastodon, I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on Twitter, I'm on YouTube, I'm on TikTok. I like TikTok because their algorithm appears to be really, really finely tuned to the kind of stuff you'd want. So
Right.
if I go to my TikTok right now and I scroll, it's going to be woodworking and retro arcades and Zelda stuff and comedians that I like and musicians that I like and funny memes that I think are cute. And it took about 3 days before TikTok figured me out.
Right.
And I see a lot of joyful, positive, uplifting content. Now, when I said it was a mistake, when I post to TikTok, it's really just old man who shakes fist at cloud. So, I am an old dude on TikTok. So, if you want to just be a consumer there, put up with the nonsense for a while, double tap on the things you like, long press, not interested on the things you don't, search for a couple of things. And within 3 days, it's going to become this amazing, joyful thing. I've got indigenous dance and inspirational Canadian people that give money to strangers at gas stations. And it's just a wonderful thing. It's not doom scrolling. That
Yep.
said, it is very addictive. And that's where the algorithmic stuff that I don't like gets into it. So I have screen time. The one we use to manage our kids,
Yep.
it's on my own phone. I use screen time to manage my TikTok time.
Interesting. Because I was going to ask a little bit more. So, by way of background for folks, I have been out to Portland a couple of times and caught up with Scott, and I've seen your boys growing up over the years. And I think the last time I was out there pre-pandemic, we were at the bagel shop, and I think you were managing. I think they had to read books or something in order to get game time at the time. I think I even remember was it you that posted about discovering might have been Zenzo trying to unlock your phone or something with your face or your fingerprint reader while you're
Oh yeah, they
asleep.
were trying to unlock it while I was asleep.
Yeah, so I do have a son. He's 4, so that gives a little bit of idea of the
Oh
age
yeah,
gap
they're
there. So
little hackers. You get ready, man.
yeah, well, that's the thing. I find this super interesting. So let's let us a few things here. Would you advise your kids to be all over social media at this point? What would be
Mm.
the I know that feels like an obvious maybe no, but
Yeah,
it is a
no.
thing. And then there's also the risk these days of blowback on the thing you said years ago that's no longer allowed, which
No.
you and I thankfully kind of dodged to a degree.
I have successfully I've successfully indoctrinated or convinced the children that it's a dumpster fire and they don't need to be on it. My older child is on Instagram and it's private, and he uses it to talk to 120 of his closest friends. And the younger child is on Snapchat and uses it to talk to a couple of dozen friends, and that's it. They have shown a complete lack of interest in any kind of content creation. They don't have any other accounts other than the ones on Snapchat and the ones on Instagram. And they have found that a lot of they have a good sense of smell as far as yeah, that's fake news and I don't like that. And that thing was designed to inflame.
Hmm.
But ultimately, I've taught them that don't let a stranger on the internet that doesn't love you ruin your day. And that's what social media is designed to do.
That's a good way of putting it. Interesting. So we might, because there was an article I read, I think it was just yesterday, that was saying, human beings are just not yet socially ready for the level of misinformation and all that, ignoring the politicized use of that word, but in general, the ability to fact check and sense it. So it's positive
Oh,
hearing that.
yeah.
One of
When
the
I was on
things,
BBSs, people were like, the moon landing was faked. Right? Like the original, they were talking about that in the 80s, right?
yep,
And you would find, when GIFs were created in 1989, you would find, or 1987, you'd find that's proof of the moon landing being fake. So yeah, misinformation has been a thing as long as it could spread. The thing that we're not prepared for is the speed at which
yes,
it could spread.
the speed and the automation of that. I noticed a thing earlier this week. We got some spam on our online forums, and at first I was actually I was looking at this and I was like, oh, this is just a user helping another user with an answer, and I realized it's a ChatGPT based answer that was actually valuable, and that they had still embedded a backlink, down in the bottom, but it was very hard to detect that it was spam until I noticed the backlink in there, and I'm just like, this stuff's going to get messy. Now, that's coming from a person who understands a bit about technology. And just before we move past talking about, growing a family, and these problems are coming up for me soon, is I kind of feel like as a nerd's nerd, I know I could set up filters and I can do all of these sorts of things. A lot of people aren't that nerdy. like I get some of these questions as well at Raygun from young parents. What would you do for this? How would you do this? Is there sort of solutions or general tips that aren't ultra hardcore that you would say, hey, for any parents listening, this is some stuff I'd look at? Oh, sorry, did I drop off for a second?
It's about there's just a little audio bobble there, but I think you're back now. We'll see if Madison notices that. Giving them enough space to make their own decisions while preventing truly harmful things from coming in is a balancing act. I do use what's called a Pi hole, Pihole, which is a Raspberry Pi as a DNS server. So all DNS is routed through a very specific Raspberry Pi DNS server. You can also use OpenDNS to prevent problematic stuff from entering the house, whether that be viruses or content, whatever you think problematic is. But I have found that it's better to discuss things with them, and I'd say they know that their internet is monitored, and I also use Microsoft Family Safety, which will flag concerning search results. It'll say, hey, so and so is searching for this thing. You might want to give them might want to talk to them about that. If you bring the hammer down and you're like, hey, don't search for that, that's a different thing than, hey, like, I want to let you know in the weekly, monitoring of the internet, mine is monitored as well. I noticed that these things were being searched for. When do you have some time to talk about that? That has been a pretty reasonably successful way to handle stuff. And usually it's just looking for stuff on for school, and then they bump into something.
Yep. And so you're doing that with the Microsoft Family Trust stuff in a Pi hole, in effect.
Right. So Microsoft Family Safety does it with Edge, and then everything else, phones and everything, gets flagged through the Pi hole.
Okay, cool. Right, and for those watching who aren't as familiar with these things, a Raspberry Pi is pretty super common. Probably think about $50 to $100 depending on the type of kit you get that set up. It's not too challenging on that front. There's a lot of guides for the Pi hole.
It's super easy, and you don't need a Raspberry Pi anymore to do it. I have a Synology, which is a NAS, a network attached storage, and it runs Docker containers. So I run my Pi hole not on a Raspberry Pi. I run it inside a Docker container on a Synology.
So there's a good chance I'm picking that if I go and Google this, I'm gonna find your probably Hanselman blog post about setting
I have a whole
up.
blog post on this. Yeah. And I want to call out Keith Patton on the chat on YouTube is calling out that daily app limits have worked and extended time for content creation. This is a really important one. My kids have unlimited creative time, which unlimited means unlimited, and they usually self-register, self-regulate. So limits on consumption, unlimited creation. So that has caused my older child to be a real artist, and he uses Procreate to draw probably for 4 or 5 hours a day, which is a lot. But I'd rather he be in Procreate for 4 hours than in TikTok for 4 hours.
Yeah, 100%. 100% agree with that.
The other thing, by the way, is using these tools not as a hammer, but as an educational tool. And I've had conversations where I say to my 15-year-old, say, hey, man, you're getting these grades, and I'm seeing you on the internet for 2 hours a day. I don't have time to do homework. I bet I can find an hour for you. Let's talk about that. Here's a way you can have an hour of extra time. And the way you do it is don't do YouTube for an hour. Oh, well, I didn't think about it that way. Those are conversations you would have with yourself.
Yep.
You just have to teach them. Nobody comes wired to know these things.
Yeah, it's a topic that I've obviously, being a parent for the last few years, I've been thinking a fair bit about, and I've been finding myself a bit torn because I don't believe in the no screen time movement entirely, because I feel like that's the world we all live in now. There's a point here where it's like the right level of, you don't want to, no offense to the Amish, but you don't want to be 18 and never have experienced technology, but you also don't want to have kind of gone too far into it either. It's a bit of a balancing act.
Yeah, I don't. That said, though, I know that parents are tired, and I want to respect parents that make those decisions. But sitting at dinner with mom, dad, and the baby's on an iPad, and mom and dad are on their phones, that shows again, you have to back up to the larger problem. Are we addicted and we have a conversation about that? Or are we hiding from something? Or are we having a fight? Or are we just so exhausted in our jobs and our lives and the big rat race that we're using that to get out of, reality?
Yep.
All I'm asking for is intentionality, right?
Yep.
Again, I'm not trying to judge. We've all seen the family of, mom, dad, and the baby, and you're all on your phones, and again, just as we talked about callback, don't judge people by your first impression. You want to think about that if it's you and you're like, wow, for the last 5 dinners. So we have dinner tonight. We have dinner together every night. No phones at the dinner table. And the boys didn't get phones until they were 13. And when they're punished, the phone is the first thing to go. And there's screen time limits and the phone shut off at 10:30.
I could definitely see that being effective.
So this is my opinion. You have a
Yep.
4-year-old.
Yep.
I don't see a reason why that 4-year-old should have a phone
Oh, definitely just not
for the
a phone.
next 5 or 10, 10 years probably.
Yep.
And by then it'll be an eye thing, and you'll beam them up into the metaverse, right?
Well, that's
It'll be a Vision Pro.
the Vision Pro. Are you are you going to get one, or are you going to wait for it to be at the discount store?
My take on the Vision Pro is the same take I had on the HoloLens. Good for those people. I will be buying whatever the Meta Quest whatever is, for $399.
Yeah, I have to say I have the whatever that last $300 one is. It's actually a pretty good device. I've been pleasantly surprised, and I backed the Oculus when it was still a Kickstarter, so I've kind of gone from the DK
Oh, yeah,
one
I've done them all.
all the
I
way
had
through.
the HTC Vive.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I've done the work. I get
Yep.
it, but I'm all about price point, right? I think if VR is going to succeed, it's got to be the same price as an Xbox,
Yep.
$399.
Yep.
That's the price point. $3,000, $3,500. Buy a TV. Buy 10 TVs.
Yep.
And a car.
I kind of speculate that there's a non-pro version that has to ship before Christmas next year for that thing to really have any shot.
But it's Apple. It's very highly polished. I can
Yep.
see it coming down to like $900 or something like that. But that's still going to make it a Western Northern Hemisphere thing, and that's not inclusive. So Android took over the entire world because they were inexpensive. VR will not take over the entire world until it's $100.
Yeah.
But $399 is a good start.
I think that
And
has
to be clear, I
actually.
don't like Facebook, and they shouldn't. I don't like the Facebook login requirement for Meta.
I was about to say exactly that. I wouldn't necessarily put Facebook at the top of my admired companies list, but to that point that they typically do kind of look at it as a mass distribution model, can't fault them on that side of the world.
Indeed.
So let's talk a little bit about tech. So, you've got your son, he's going out, he's putting out these CVs. We've talked a little about should he be worried about AI taking his job? Should he what's your guidance at the moment? And I'm going to assume you see the secret research at Microsoft, so you know more than me. So, what would you advise, Zenzo?
I'm definitely more of a naysayer than not, because the internet was the Industrial Revolution, the internet, the IoT was like, these are all inflection points. High bandwidth, pocket supercomputers, in our and now AI. My concern is the generative aspect of AI is being trained on my content, my last 20 years of my blog.
Mm-hmm.
And why should I write my blog anymore then? So then the question is, if we spend the last 30, 40 years building the internet and typing, and now we can generate the next 40 years of the internet in a couple of months, how are we going to make sure that we don't train it on that, and get a copy of a copy? And we're just basically enabling posting of just garbage, just poop on the internet. You know what I mean? And then we'll go, and some models will train on it, some models won't. Right now, we're also burning a lot of carbon doing these questions, and that's a little concerning. That said, from a programming perspective, we're going to go from being very procedural based to being very intent based. what you're doing is you're expressing your intention to the model, the large language model, and then it's using statistics to present how it would have solved that problem given procedural. It's about 80% right now. If you go and Google for Scott and Mark Learn to Code, we did it. I don't know if you saw this or not. We did this at Build. We built a game in 45 minutes from scratch using ChatGPT and Copilot, and you could see where the problems are. But is it going to take your job away? I hope not, because it's statistics. It's not judgment. There's no judgment there. There's bias, but there's no actually it's making a judgment. The example that I like to give is JD, it's a beautiful day. Let's go to the
store.
Okay, that's weird. What do most people say? Beach.
Yep.
Park, right? But you, of course, said store. So here's the question, right? Now you're a large language model. You're a big large language model trained on all of your world's experiences. What was it about your entire life and context I can't see that caused you to say store? You probably need to go to the store right now because there's missing, unhidden, there's hidden context that I can't see. So when you go to a large language model and you say, it's a beautiful day, let's go to the, have you ever heard of Family Feud? You ever see this game?
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And the guy goes to the big board and he says, show me.
Yep.
And then the top one is beach. And the fifth one is store. And then we're at home going, who needs to go to the store? That's weird. But the large language model, the JD Trask large language model just said store. So it must be right. And then I copy paste. It's a beautiful day. Let's go to the store into my paper. And now that influences the next model. And we don't know why. Is it a roll of the dice? Is it what's called the temperature slider on the large language model? All of those things need to be understood. But when a computer makes a decision for you and you go, oh, I'll pick that one, whether it be Grammarly, where my kids just go, that looks like a cool word, I'll pick that one, or whether it be the statistical models of a very large language model, I still think we're going to need humans to drive stick shift and be able to control these self-driving cars to mix my metaphors a little bit. I don't know how scary the hockey stick is going to get, but they are not thinking if we don't ask them anything. They're not thinking right now. They are prompt-based. They are intent-based. They are biased. I think we need to start teaching ethics in computer science class ASAP. It's the challenge with a highly politicized environment plus misinformation does make it rather concerning. I do know Microsoft, at least because I'm on the inside, is focused on responsible AI. I hope everyone else is as well.
Yeah, it's certainly.
Sorry for the long answer, by the way.
No. I think it's a bit, it is an inflection point that we're a part of, and it is going to have repercussions beyond what do I do in an IDE, right? It's spilling out into the real world. I share your views on a lot of that side of things. I see it as this is not to disagree with anything you just said, but I see it as massively lowering the barriers. Like, we had an AI week at Raygun where we effectively paused the company, and I wanted to ensure that everybody, regardless of role, was sort of up to play with these tools and could understand kind of where the limits are. I saw it as a mechanism to ensure that we could have higher quality discussions in our own business about this stuff by having everybody upskill. And one of the things that we did for the first half of the first day was we had the entire company do the software engineering coding challenge that we give software developers that we hire. And from what I understand, pretty much everybody completed it, and that was this light bulb moment of, hang on, I especially for the people who weren't software engineers, I could actually tackle this problem now that, previously I might have found a lot more difficult to go and tackle. And this is starting to play on my mind a little bit. Like, I'm thinking of ideas, I'm sure you are all the time, and you're like, the only real limit here is my time and motivation, because I can actually go and get the guiding principles of what needs to happen very easily now. Like, we did have the internet in our pocket, but we still had to go searching. And now we can kind of, like, say, synthesize an answer out of that information related to my particular problem. And I think that sort of shift the needle in some really interesting ways that I don't think we're fully sort of caught up with yet.
Agree with everything, but in my style of yes and uh, remembering though that the pool of people for which it lowered the bar were the set of humans that work for you,
Yes, this is true.
which are already a privileged few because they're working in tech at a tech company that is humane and that is thoughtful and that is responsible in the use of AI. The question is, what did the Industrial Revolution do for those that had nothing? It gave some people stuff and it pushed a lot of people farther down. What did the internet do? Like, it lifted some people up and it pushed others down. So, as with all technology inflection points, someone's going to lose. But that's not AI's fault, right? That's kind of the larger 4% growth above all problem, right? You
Yep.
could call it capitalism problem, but that appears to even now be a political buzzword. So if we remove that, the decision that the global economy requires 4% growth, otherwise economics doesn't work, as opposed to uh, sustainability
Yep.
as a model, right? Like, I don't know what it's like to run a company of your size. I wonder what would happen if I decided to say, we are not going to grow, we are going to maintain, we're going to be a boutique, and our goal is to do as well as we can do or match inflation. You probably wouldn't be on the stock market, you probably wouldn't have investors, you probably wouldn't have people excited, about that, because we are built in to say X% growth a year, but compounding over 100 years, it's just not sustainable, right? Pizza is going to be $100 soon.
Yeah, I think there was an interesting point raised about the pandemic and the fact that the pandemic kicked off. We were already going to see 2020 as the year that the workforce started to contract. And that wasn't related to the fact we were having a pandemic. That was just based on we've been talking for the prior 30 years about the baby boomers. They're all going to start retiring at some point. All of these sorts of things are going to happen. And you know, I'm sure you may remember in the 80s, interest rates were quite high then. And it crosses my mind. There's a lot of us that are in our 40s, early 50s, and we haven't really actually had to be in a high inflationary environment. We've never operated in an environment where a population is perhaps shrinking or the total addressable market is actually getting smaller, and that I think is going to really screw up that fundamental economic situation that we are staring down. Is it's like, well, you can't count on growth. And so we make this argument that, hey, well, we've just invented some AI that's going to help us dramatically. But to that larger point, it's like, well, does it help us so dramatically that we're all, as humans, the losers in 100 years? That could be the way that goes. Who knows?
Well, the only answer is sustainability. I keep coming back to that, right? Like, what's it going to take to be around for 1,000 years?
Yep.
People are only focused on staying alive till Tuesday.
Yep. There's also an interesting point around that idea, and I think Bill Gates has put this one forward of sort of taxing the AIs and robots, sort of saying, hey, this could be a pathway to enabling things like shorter work weeks, higher quality of life, and all of that, in the near term. The only thing I sometimes personally struggle a wee bit with that is, I feel a little bit like human beings don't necessarily do better because we get more comfortable. There's clearly an optimal point, and we could deliver pure perfection potentially. And I just think that would not necessarily be the right outcome for us. Having said that, that is an opinion that obviously comes from a place of, hey, I've got quite a lot of comfort already. So how do we spread some of that around maybe before we make it perfect?
Yep, you're asking all the right questions. I don't have the answers myself, but I think we need to go into all of these things with eyes open, with a clear understanding about how these things work,
Yep.
and remembering that no technology exists in a vacuum. Everything has historical context, political context, societal context, and needs to be thought about.
Yeah, 100%. We're coming up a little bit closer to the end of our time here, Scott, which I feel like we could have turned this into an 8 hour, type of. We could have gone down a lot of rabbit holes here, but I appreciate the time you have made available. Um, One of the topics I didn't quite kind of get to, we touched on a little bit of talking about, maybe how you'd think about for your children sort of coming into the workplace. and whatnot. But let's talk a little bit about let's go back to the developer audience a little bit. Any sort of guidance you have. Let's think of people maybe in their up to 25, maybe they're older, but they've just joined the tech industry. Any sort of evergreen sort of advice that isn't related to a piece of tech that you'd like to share. I know you've
Well,
shared a lot of this over the years, but
I have always said focus on the fundamentals. Like, what do you stand for? I hitched my wagon to the web, and by that I mean open web standards. If I was going to tell a 25-year-old or a 20-year-old or my own kid one thing, is understand HTTP. Sounds silly, but like, I've seen SOAP come and go, and REST is coming and going, and GraphQL, and like it's all HTTP, it's all TCP. Like, if I say there's a generation of young programmers that I like say, oh, like, well, I think maybe your local DNS is wrong, or maybe you had a DNS issue, your local DNS fallback, or maybe you have a multi-home system. Now I'm talking Greek to them. Know your stack. HTTP, DNS, OSI. Now I recognize that, and I've used this analogy before, so forgive me if people follow me around the internet, but I realize that I am a older person of a certain generation who is saying to the Uber generation, and I don't mean Uber super, I mean Uber as in driving an Uber, that they should learn how to drive stick shift. But learning to drive stick shift makes you a better driver. It makes you understand watching drivers. It makes you understand that there's a car underneath your Uber ride. And if all you do is go through a boot camp and learn React, the second something breaks in HTTP or DNS or in TCP/IP, you're going to get stuck. So I've talked about this before. Where's my Swiss Army knife? I think I was going to show you my Swiss Army knife. I keep my Swiss Army knife on my desk. Apparently, one of my kids took it to remind me to try to be broad and T-shaped. In T-shaped developers have a broad understanding of everything, and they go deep in one thing. And I went deep in the open web.
Yep. That is good advice. I found that when I get asked a little bit about, is a university degree still useful?
So if it feeds your spirit and it's what you need, then yes. For my kids, that's what they want. They want structure. But if you're an autodidact and you just want a different kind of structure, do a boot camp or but whatever. Everything I learned in school is over. Every language I learned, every operating system, they're all dead, right? Other than C, none of these languages exist anymore, right? So why did I go there? To learn how to learn. That's what a university degree says to me.
That's what I was going to add, is that I feel like it taught me a lot of things that I didn't have to know, but I may not have known about if they didn't teach me. And when I'm doing things like debugging and the sort of area I particularly like to play in when I am still coding is in performance engineering. So I still like to do a little bit of, assembly code in the right place, understand those sorts of things. But when I'm coding, understanding like how a CPU actually might work to a degree, actually helps for a person interested in performance engineering. But I'm not sure I would have got that if I'd purely self-taught myself. Oh, I'm going to go off camera because I look close.
I can actually zoom in close because I'm an idiot. Here, hang on a second. Are you still there?
Yeah, I am. Yep.
All right, hang on a second.
You're building a CPU. Is that what you're up to?
Yeah, so this is a thing. You should get this.
I should.
It's called Smarty Kits. I'm building an Apple One.
Oh, cool.
From chips.
Yeah.
So when I turn it on with the battery pack, you can see the bus right there.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Hey, Maddie, when we send out the email after this, let's put a link to this in there. I'm sure I'm not the only one wanting to buy one.
SmartyKit.io. So I've got the video and keyboard stuff hooked up, and you buy this kit. It's approved by Wozniak, and by the end of the kit, when you're done, you've built an Apple One, and you actually load his 1976 Apple ROM on it.
Oh,
it's pretty freaking cool. You can actually see the clock flashing.
Oh, yes, the green LED.
And then if I were typing, you'd see the codes going across the bus.
I
Now,
look.
do you need to do that to be a web developer? No. Should a 20-year-old do this if it doesn't feed their spirit? No. Is it awesome? Yes, it is awesome.
I love that. I think that's probably an excellent spot to wrap up on. I've got to go and order one of those before the next meeting. That's really cool. Hey, Scott, thanks so much, though, for taking the time today to come and chat with us, share some of your insights. Like I say, I've appreciated over the years. I'm sure you have no idea how much you've influenced my own life. So thank you very much for all that you have done for the community, and thanks for
That's
spending
very
the time
kind.
with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure. Always nice to hang out with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. All right. Take care, and thanks everybody for joining.